This cheese is so hot off the press, it's making an absolute mess all over my monitor and keyboard. No idea what the title means, which one's immovable, which one's unstoppable. All I know is these are two of the hottest up and coming grandmothers in the world, both from India, both very young, prodigies, and they clash today at the Tata Steel Cheese tournament, one of the greatest in the world. This is some epic chess, and one player gets mated. Basically, they resign with one move to go. Let's have a look. Pragg kicks off with d4 here. Knight f6, the explosive c4. Arjun playing black, Ramesh Babu Pragnananda with white. We now see e6, knight f3, d5, and I love this. G3, the Catalan, named after a chess-playing cat called Alan. Only viewers of Septic Cheese know that. Do consider subscribing, really helps my self-esteem, and you pick up great facts like that. We get this pawn now taking on c4. Never really understood that one. Opening the diagonal for this bishop, but fine, this is modern guildmaster theory. We now see the center attacked, castles, knight c6, and with the pressure on the center insurmountable, we see takes on c5. The queens leave the board here. The female cat's dead, and after rook recaptures, bishop takes on c5. White does retain a small edge here, mainly due to the lead in development. Now with the pawn on c4 about to drop, how come you can't go b5, defend it? Well, you get whack bamwoozled with this tactic here. The knight's going to drop, of course, and if you take, well, then you're dropping rookie in the corner. You're in exchange down. No good. So don't open the diagonal. Instead, we see the pawn advance here, sacrifice itself for the good of the army, mangle the structure, but it does also, in the process, open a file, as we're going to see. Pragg whispers anyone for a knight maneuver. We love a nerdy chess notation joke on this channel, and after bishop d7 developing, rook b1 hitting the pawn, this is a great move. Arjun knows his stuff. He's over 2800 now. He plays knight a5. Normally a boo-boo to put it on the edge of the board, but this is a dynamic way to cover the pawn, and you prepare bishop c6, challenge that monster. So knight b3 is played by Pragg. He goes to Forktown on the minor pieces, therefore we get takes, and if you take with the rook, you run into bishop a4 and you get skewered down here. So pawn takes, also logical to connect the pawns. And now with the big pressure on b7, this move is basically forced. If you try defend with one of the rooks, then you run into bishop f4, and of course if you push, you drop an exchange here. So this was played, but I mention it because you can now take and you compromise the pawn structure. We wouldn't quite go as far to say that it's a structure only a mother could love, but maybe a structure only a sister or a brother could love, a sibling. Pragg with an edge now. We see knight d3 attacking the bishop. It drops back. Now bishop e3 looking to dominate that square. Rook fc8 prepares to push the juicer, and that's why Pragg now sits on the head of the pawn like a sumo wrestler. King f8 covers the bishop, and rook a1 is where the master blasters belong, on the half open files, and that's why Arjun is forced to react. He pours some sugar on that pawn, and king f1. Activate the monarch in the endgame. Knight d7 fights for that critical square. We see the exchange. King recaptures. Rook a3 here, and the c pawn advances. Good chess, preparing c4, therefore liquidating the weakness. You'd have the double attack, knight and pawn, and that's why Pragg pushes p himself, fixes the structure. c5 could be a target in future. So rook b7 played, going after the backwards b pawn. Rook d to a1 now on the board here, stacking the two towers. Tolkien would be proud. a5 now on the board, and it's a good clamping move. Plus, one day you prepare to potentially liquidate. Picture this kind of thing. So the king marches in. Black follows suit here. Knight c1. Has Pragg completely forgotten which way his pieces are supposed to move? Well, no, he's looking for some epic horseplay here. He now defends the pawn, pressures a5 therefore, so this rook covers. Given the exclam, meaning it's the only move move to keep a balance in the position or keep the eval bar where it was. And now knight a2, we see the journey it's going on. You can't liquidate this pawn, or knight c3, no time to take, or you're dropping a rook. So we run back. Instead, we see king c6. The knight hits c3. Knight to b6 played, all very natural, and f4 now gains some space. You can definitely imagine e4 on the way one day too, but be a bit careful. Sometimes e3 could be prudent to keep control of the outpost. Pawns can never move backwards, of course. So whose move is it? Black to play. We now see knight c8 on the board. There are some lines here, by the way, where you sack a pawn, liquidate it, but get pressure for it. Not that it's necessarily the best here. We're going to see a key moment coming. First, this knight hits b5, hits the rook, jumps up to a6, of course, to stay with the defense of this pawn. Now we see rook d1 onto the open file, prepares to invade, and that's why the knight sallies back forth, allows this one to cover the invasion square. These bases are covered here. You can give the check now, but the king steps back. Instead, Pragg goes for rook a2, and this is a key moment because the liquidating move of a4 technically possible. Here's a sample line. I'm going to click through a few moves here. These tiptoes by black aren't easy to find, but with this sort of back and forth with the rook, you can technically land a rook b4 shot at the end of the line, win the pawn. Even here, you have to be a bit careful. Your rook feels slightly offside, the pawn's marching, but the all-powerful stock barnacle says it should technically be holding. You've just got a few squares to play with, yo-yo back and forth. Okay, we run back, a4 not played. Instead, rook f8 gets given the question mark. Now we see the check played, king b7, the knight back to c3, and it's rotating into e4 now, whereupon it targets the weakened c pawn and could threaten knight g5 in some lines, even coming to d6 in some lines. This is pretty unpleasant for black here. So the rook now comes back to the final file, or the first file, depending how you look at it. Rook a d2, not the most precise here, but they're coming down on time control towards move 40. Pragg's holding the pressure, and he finds a great maneuver with rook d1. Looks counterintuitive to leave the advanced spot, but you're preparing to double. So rook a7, now the rook's double, but rook f to a8 here, and how do you actually protect all the pawns? Because now knight b5 comes, rook forced to move, and then check, king goes, f pawn drops. Freddy has died. Pragg's in the driving seat here now because the other pawn's critically weak also. We get knight d7 covering the e5 square. Knight g5 hits two pawns. One's already covered. h6 looks natural, but also knight f6 is a good defensive move and prepares to activate potentially. Knight f3 played, spinning into here perhaps, or after knight e4, we don't see that. Very playable move, but a defensive one selected instead. The rook endgame, very favourable for white. Still a big weakness here. King would be marching in very fast. Pawns rolling. So the knights stay on the board here. King f2 played. Knight g4 check. The king comes this way to cover the weak pawn. And now e5 at least liquidates one weakness. If h3, by the way, then check. King goes, you take and defend. This is how the line could proceed. So the knight and the pawn aren't dying. White remains better. But instead, we see the move of knight e4, targeting c5. Now we get takes, pawn recaptures, rook e8, and thankfully this one's doing not just a great attacking job, but defensive also. It's like a clock hand. It's at 9:15 or 3 o'clock, or however you look at it. I love when rooks do multi-purpose jobs. And now what do we see played? This pawn dropping. By the way, why wasn't it defended? I think it's quite tough. King c6. Didn't really click down it. It's sort of saying rook d2, start invading. Maybe you kick this knight soon. Not sure. Either way, white retains the pressure, right? So Arjun, he goes for the active play basically. Gives this pawn here, but then goes rook c6. We see knight d3 and now rook g6. Looking for the counterplay against the exposed king. But cool and calm, what does Pragg do? Move the king out of the x-ray. No, he just plays h3, Come at me, bro. Do your worst here. The knight now does check. Double whammy check. So, of course, we hear Arjun whisper check checkity or check times 2. Some people say check squared. Different ways to do it. King f2 was played here. And after rook g2 check, you're almost trapped in a mating net, but not quite. There are a few wiggle room squares. The king comes to f3. Far away the best move. Okay, king e1 and you're actually worst. Never click down that line. So this has to be played apparently. Rook h2 goes after the pawn, but knight f2, lovely slide back, covering the pawn. G5 now played, just looking to rip open lines, but cool and calm. We see this pawn now drop. It was moribund for about 20 moves, takes his played, and now we get the check on the board. And actually, it's not white's king getting exposed, it's black's king, because it now steps up the board. If it were to step backwards, let's say here, to keep tabs with its own rook, then you can take on h7, and there's a mate threat on the board, and you just can't deal with this stuff without shedding tons of material, and then you're still lost. So the king wanders up the board here, getting flushed out like a bad smell. We see knight e4 check. You could give an exchange here, but that's hopelessly lost. So king e6 is played, check, king e5, another check, and now you should go king e6, but then you can take on f4, and everything's just absolutely woeful. Where does the knight go? You know, this is one of the best moves. Check. Then you're literally shedding material on the spot. It's absolutely awful. So we see the king step this way instead of e6, but given the single question mark, I mean, surely it should be a massive double question mark because it's checkmate in 2. Can you shut the trap? Remember, the king cannot move forward, so the way to go is with this check because it's also sliced here. What to do? You've only got one legal move, this, and then shut the trap at your leisure with either rook. Very, very beautiful from Pragg. Awesome game by him. Really just unraveled Arjun in this Catalan. Hope you enjoyed. Have a look at the video on screen if you want to see some more epic chess, and I hope to see you again soon. Cheers.